"Daddy, why is she sleeping there?" Olivia's small voice broke through the holiday noise as she pointed to the bench by the bus stop. James Walker followed her gaze and saw a young woman curled around a baby, the blanket in her arms too thin for the freezing night. Snow clung to her tangled hair, her sweater torn at the sleeves, her shoulders shaking with the cold. The infant's cheeks were red, his tiny fists twitching against the icy air. James tightened his grip on Olivia's hand and pulled gently, ready to keep walking. The city was full of people he could not save. His polished shoes crunched in the snow, his coat heavy on his shoulders. But Olivia refused to move. She planted her boots, her eyes wide, whispering that the baby was too small, that he was cold. He stopped. The sound of carolers drifted faintly from the corner. Silent night carried on the wind, but none of it touched him. All he saw was the child's trembling hand and the girl's pale face pressed against his blanket. Logic urged him to turn away. Compassion, spoken through his daughter's voice, held him still. James drew a breath, his chest tight with the silence of 3 winters spent alone. He looked down at Olivia. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes shining with hope he had not felt in years. For a moment, the world narrowed to this choice. Then he exhaled slowly and stepped toward the bench. James touched the young woman's shoulder, his voice low but steady, telling her she could not stay out here tonight. Sophia stirred, her eyes opening in panic as she clutched the baby tighter. She tried to stand, her legs trembling, saying she did not need pity. He answered quietly that it was not pity, it was warmth. Olivia stood behind him, watching with a certainty far beyond her years, whispering that the baby was cold. Something inside Sophia broke, and with a weary nod she followed when James led the way. The ride was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the faint breathing of the baby. Sophia kept her arms wrapped around Liam, her back pressed to the door as if ready to run. Her eyes darted to the leather seats, the glowing dashboard, the child in the front seat humming a carol. James glanced at her in the mirror but said nothing. She carried the weight of someone who had been judged too many times and expected another blow to come. When they reached the penthouse, warm air rushed out as the door opened. Golden light spilled across polished floors, the smell of pine from the towering Christmas tree filling the space. Sophia froze in the entryway, snow melting from her shoes, her arms still clutching the baby. Luxury surrounded her, but all she felt was fear of not belonging. James motioned gently toward a guest room. He spoke with calm assurance that she and the baby could rest there. Sophia lowered Liam into the crib that had once belonged to Olivia. Her hands shook as she smoothed the blanket, afraid the moment would vanish. She sat on the edge of the bed, coat still on, her back stiff, as if expecting to be told to leave. The silence of the room pressed against her, but it was different from the silence of the street. This silence was warm. She closed her eyes for only a moment, and sleep claimed her faster than she had ever allowed before. For the first time in months, she breathed without fear. The smell of toast filled the kitchen the next morning. Sophia stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, rinsing dishes and scrambling eggs, while Liam slept nearby in the crib James had brought out. She moved quickly, almost nervously, wanting to prove she was not just taking. Every motion carried the weight of someone desperate to show dignity in a place that did not belong to her. Mrs. Harris walked in, sharp eyes catching the extra dish and the faint scent of baby powder. She had served the Walker family for more than a decade, loyal and protective. She lowered her voice when she found James in his study, saying the young woman could be after more than kindness. Men like him, she warned, were easy targets. James listened in silence, but Sophia, walking past with a folded towel, heard every word. Her chest tightened as if the warmth of the penthouse had suddenly turned cold. She returned to the guest room, hands shaking as she packed Liam's blanket and tiny clothes. Whispering to her baby, she told him they had stayed long enough, that it was time to leave before they wore out their welcome. She pressed her lips to his forehead, holding back tears, and opened the door quietly. Olivia came running down the hall and wrapped her arms around Sophia's legs. "Please don't go." Her small voice trembled but was clear. "Mommy always said, helping others is the best gift. You and Liam are our Christmas gift." Sophia froze, tears burning at the corners of her eyes, unable to move. James appeared at the end of the hallway, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. He had heard the doubt, the whispers, and now he saw the truth in front of him. For a moment, he stood still, caught between reason and memory. Then he remembered his wife's last words, to be kind even when it hurt. He stepped closer, his voice steady, telling Sophia she was not using them. He asked her to stay, and in the quiet that followed, trust began to take root. The sound of laughter came from the kitchen. Olivia sat on a stool with flour on her cheeks, while Sophia tried to roll out cookie dough. Liam gurgled from his spot in the high chair, pounding the tray with tiny fists as if cheering them on. James stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching a scene he had not known in years. It was ordinary, yet it felt extraordinary. The apartment had grown louder in the days since Sophia stayed. Olivia's drawings decorated the fridge, Sophia's soft voice carried through the hall, and the faint smell of cocoa lingered at night. For so long the penthouse had been silent, filled only with his footsteps and the echo of loss. Now it pulsed with life. The emptiness that once pressed on his chest was still there, but not as heavy. In the evenings, James often found himself pausing on the stairs, listening. Olivia would beg Sophia to read her stories, and her voice would drift through the house, calm and warm. Sometimes she sang to Liam, soft lullabies that seemed to settle more than just the baby. James stayed in the shadows, not wanting to break the moment, but feeling the ache inside him shift into something gentler. One Saturday afternoon, the three of them decorated the tree in the living room. Olivia insisted on hanging ornaments too high. Sophia laughed and lifted her, while James untangled the lights. For a moment he caught himself smiling without effort. It startled him. He realized it had been years since his face had moved that way. The house glowed brighter than the lights they strung. Sophia never tried to fill the silence with questions. She let the space breathe, and in that space James noticed her more. The way she tied Liam's blanket tighter when the draft swept in. The way her hands moved when she sketched on scraps of paper, always observing, always recording. She carried scars, he could see that, yet she never let them harden her completely. It humbled him. One evening, Olivia came running with a folded paper, tugging his sleeve. She told him Sophia had made something for him, but that he could not look until after dinner. He played along, curious but patient. Later, in the quiet of the sunroom, Olivia placed the drawing in his hands. James opened it and froze. It was him and Olivia beneath the Rockefeller Christmas tree. He was kneeling, tying her shoelace, and she was looking down at him with one small hand resting on his shoulder. Warm lights surrounded them like a halo. He had not realized anyone had seen that moment. His throat tightened as he looked up at Sophia standing near the window, her eyes soft but unreadable. He asked how she noticed. She said gently that she paid attention to the things people forgot to see. Her words struck him deeper than he expected. For years he had moved through life without being seen, not truly. Now here was someone who had noticed a fleeting gesture between him and his daughter and turned it into art. It felt like being remembered. James sat long after they left the room, the drawing still in his hands. He thought of his late wife, of the silence after she was gone, and of how he had convinced himself that love was finished for him. But the image of Olivia's small hand on his shoulder, captured by Sophia, told him otherwise. His heart was not empty. It was waiting. The days that followed carried a different rhythm. He joined them in the kitchen more often, sat closer during story time, let Olivia pull him into laughter he had once resisted. Sophia never asked him to change, but somehow her presence made it possible. Piece by piece, the grief that had buried him began to loosen its hold. He was not healed, not yet, but he could feel the first fragile stirrings of love again. Sophia remembered the night she left home with nothing but a backpack and the test still hidden in her pocket. Her mother's voice echoed like ice, telling her she had chosen shame. She walked out into the freezing dark and realized she had nowhere to go. The world had turned its back before she even had a chance to fight. When her belly began to grow, shelters became her only refuge. Some nights she curled up on a thin mattress surrounded by strangers, whispering to the child inside her that he was wanted, even if no one else believed it. Other nights she sat on bus benches, pulling her coat tighter while fear gnawed at her. The silence was heavy, filled only with the sound of her own breath and the steady reminder of the life growing inside her. Giving birth was not the moment she had imagined as a girl. There was no hand to hold, no family waiting, just the sharp smell of antiseptic, the cry of pain breaking from her throat, and nurses who looked at her with tired pity. She remembers gripping the sheets, screaming through the hours, telling herself she could not break because her son needed her to be strong. When they finally placed Liam on her chest, her tears came not from joy but from the crushing weight of knowing she had to do this alone. The first weeks were a blur of exhaustion and fear. She held Liam through the night because there was no one else. She learned how to feed him with trembling hands, counting pennies to buy formula when her body could not keep up. Every cry pierced her like a blade, not because of the noise, but because she feared she might fail him. She promised him out loud that he would never feel unwanted, even if she had been cast aside. Winter was the hardest. Her coat was thin, and her shoes leaked snow. She gave him her last scraps of food, wrapping her arms around him in doorways where the wind cut through every layer. Sometimes she closed her eyes and imagined her family opening their door, saying they had changed their minds. But the door never opened. She was invisible to them, except for the shame they said she carried. Now, in James's home, the contrast was almost unbearable. For the first time, no one questioned her worth as a mother. She watched James lift Liam with gentle strength, and her chest ached with a longing she thought she had buried. It felt like stepping into a world she had only drawn on paper, a place where her child was not a burden, but a gift. One evening, as firelight flickered across the living room, she finally let herself speak. She told James how she had walked into the hospital alone, how every contraction made her believe she might die, and how she prayed that Liam would live even if she didn't. Her voice broke as she described holding her baby while her body trembled with weakness. For the first time, someone listened, without judgment, without turning away. James reached for her hand, steady and sure, and told her she no longer had to carry the world alone. The words unlocked something deep inside her. She felt the years of silence and rejection loosen their grip. Tears streamed down her face, not from shame, but from the fragile hope that she might finally be worthy of love, not only as a mother, but as herself. For the first time in years, Sophia let herself breathe, certain that maybe the worst was behind her. But that fragile peace was about to be tested on a night when the snow fell heavier than ever. The storm rolled in quickly that night, snow swirling against the windows while the fire flickered low. Sophia woke to the sound of Liam's restless whimpers and rushed to the crib. Her hand touched his forehead, and she gasped. His skin was burning, his tiny body limp against her arms. Her voice shook as she called for James. He appeared still in his dress shirt, moments away from a late business call, but the sight of her fear stopped him cold. She stammered that Liam would not wake, that his fever was too high, her words breaking apart as tears blurred her eyes. James did not hesitate. He pulled on his coat, told her to hold Liam close, and led them quickly to the car. The Range Rover tore through the snowy streets, headlights cutting through the storm as Sophia rocked her baby, whispering his name again and again, as if the sound could anchor him to life. James's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, but his voice was steady each time he said they would make it. The hospital lights were too bright, the air too sterile. Nurses rushed forward, lifting Liam from Sophia's trembling arms. She reached out, desperate, but James caught her hand and guided her to a chair before she collapsed. Her body shook with sobs as the doors closed on her son. Through the glass, James stood watching the small team work quickly over the infant's crib. Tubes and wires covered a body far too small. He pulled a chair close and sat, reaching in to wrap his hand gently around Liam's. The boy's tiny fingers curled faintly, fitting perfectly against his own. Sophia looked up through tear-blurred vision and saw James sitting there, steady and unmovable, his head bowed as if in prayer. He had walked away from everything without a thought, and he was here now, not as a stranger, not as a benefactor, but as a father. In that moment, she knew he already loved Liam as his own. The days after Liam's fever broke felt like stepping out of a storm. He was back to smiling, babbling, and gripping Sophia's fingers as if he had never been sick. Relief washed over her, but so did determination. She told James she needed to work, that she could not simply take without giving back. James listened, but he already had a plan. A week later, he asked her to come with him to the Upper East Side. When she stepped inside the small gallery, her breath caught. Paintings and sketches lined the walls, each one hers. The quiet moments she had drawn in the sunroom, the city streets she had sketched in passing, even the memory of James tying Olivia's shoelace, all framed and lit with care. She turned to him in disbelief, but his eyes were steady. He told her that he remembered something she once said, that she wanted to share what she saw. This was his way of making sure she could. He had bought the space, but it belonged to her now. That night, the gallery filled with neighbors, friends, and strangers who paused to study her work. Sophia stood in the corner, her heart racing, not sure how to stand in the spotlight. Then James stepped forward, and the room grew quiet. His voice carried warmth as he spoke of her talent, but more than that, of her heart. He called her an artist who could capture the unseen, a mother who had given everything to protect her child, and a woman who had reminded him what love truly meant. The words sank into her deeper than any praise she had ever received. For the first time, she was not invisible, not a burden, not someone to be pitied. She was seen. Tears blurred her vision as the applause rose around her. Sophia pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed by the weight of belonging. When she glanced at James, he was watching her, not with pity or duty, but with quiet pride. In that moment, she realized this was not charity. This was recognition. This was love taking root. The gallery was quiet long after the last guest had gone. Sophia stood alone near a painting, still overwhelmed by the applause that had filled the room. James stepped beside her, his presence steady, his voice low as he told her he meant every word he had spoken. She turned toward him, her eyes shining with tears she no longer tried to hide. She whispered that she had spent so long believing she was unworthy, that no one could ever see her for more than her mistakes. James shook his head gently and said she had given, even when she had nothing, that she had taught him how to feel again. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence wrapped around them, not heavy but tender, like a space carved only for them. When she leaned into him, it was not with fear but with trust. He held her close, not as someone rescuing her, but as someone who had finally found home in her arms. They had both carried wounds that seemed impossible to heal, yet in each other they found belonging. Relief spread through them, quiet and deep, like the settling of a storm. What remained was love, steady and real, the kind built on respect and choice. Snow dusted the backyard as lanterns glowed along the fence. A year had passed since the night at the bus stop, and everything had changed. Instead of gifts, the family sat at a long table covered with brushes and paints, creating pictures of memories they wanted to keep forever. Olivia leaned forward, with her tongue poking out as she painted a house with 4 figures beneath a Christmas tree. Sophia laughed softly as Liam smeared blue across his paper, leaving tiny handprints like snowflakes. James watched them all, the blanket of peace heavier than any snowfall. When Olivia looked up, her eyes were bright with the question that had lived in her heart. She asked if they were a family now. James pulled her close, wrapping his arm around Sophia and lifting Liam against his chest, his voice steady when he told her forever. They stayed there in the fading light, 4 souls who had once been broken, now fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. The snow kept falling, but inside that circle of love, it felt warm. Kindness had brought them together, and love had made them whole. If this story touched your heart, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to Emotional Echoes, the place where true accounts and moving fiction come together to heal, uplift, and remind us of life's deepest values. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep your heart open. Don't forget to subscribe Emotional Echoes for more soul-stirring stories.